Hey, welcome back. This is episode 2 of the DeWalt Radial arm saw series, and we're looking at this book called Easy Ways to Expert Woodworking. It was written in the 1950s by the DeWalt company. So I'm going to show you some things in the book, and we're also going to take a look at setting this up for a resawing operation. We'll talk about in-ripping and out-ripping. I'll show you the scale that's built in on the side of the radial arm, and then we'll get to cutting and show you what that looks like. Okay, so for resawing, we go back to one of these pictures I showed in the last video where they were doing some ripping of some wide plywood without safety glasses and things like that, of course, back then. But down here, this picture here shows you how to do some resawing with larger material, thicker material, and they talk about using a thicker fence. So I'm going to show you that over there on the actual saw and on the table and talk to you about the details of that and what I learned by reading this part. So the way these tables were designed, this front table is independent of the back table, separated by the fence. The fence is removable, and you can take out the fence and put in different sizes or configurations depending on what you're trying to do. So in this case, I took out the other fence, I put in this higher fence, and that's because we're going to be using it to put the board against, and it's going to be a nice square surface to put that board against to do our resawing. The main knob in the back of the saw right here raises and lowers the arm, and each turn is 1/8 of an inch. So they talk about in the book how that is a very accurate way to be able to set your cut as this arm rides up and down on that threaded rod. Okay, right now I'm set up in the cross-cutting configuration. If we want to turn it to do some ripping or resawing, we need to lift this pin right here. And you lift that pin, and then also on the other side, there's a knob that you need to loosen up. You loosen the knob up, pull the pin, and now you're free to spin this in 360 degrees. So if I turn it this way with the blade facing the fence, I'm now set up for what they refer to as an in-rip. And then this configuration they would call an out-rip. So you can do either one, and then once you have it in place and you know that it's parallel to the fence, you can lock it in place with this lever over here you see on my right hand. That lever locks that in place, and then it's not going to move at all. Once you loosen that up, again, you can lift this pin and you can set it at whatever angle you want. So that's the angle, or that's the way you set a miter angle also. So once I move this over to that in-rip position, I lock the pin down. Now what I want to do, because there's a little bit of play in my saw, I'm going to put it along the blade along the fence. I'm going to get this pawl and make sure that's out of my way. I'm going to move the blade along the fence, and I'm going to make sure that it's parallel. I'm going to eye that up. Once I know it's parallel, I'm going to use this knob right here, and I'm going to pull it back, and that will lock it in place at that position. Now I have it in position, I'm going to hook up my hose here, which I've been using for some dust collection, and this really does help to collect that dust off this elbow right here. The way I have it set up, this runs up and around, and then I'll move it over here so you can see that hose then attaches over on this side to this port, and then right here I have a little dust box to collect it when I'm doing cross cuts. A few months ago I got some old cedar posts that came off of an old arbor. I helped my neighbor remove these posts and replace them with some treated pine, and the posts themselves, where they were in mid-span, since they were painted, are still in good shape. So what I'm going to do is, you can see on the end here, if I flip it around, where we cut it off, the cedar still looks like it's in pretty decent shape. So I'm going to try to resaw it on here instead of using the bandsaw. And to do that, now I'm using an 8 1/4 inch blade. I put on the Freud Diablo 8 1/4 inch blade, and that's the blade I usually had in my table saw. I have a 9-inch table saw, and this is also a 9-inch saw. But 9-inch blades are hard to come by these days. You can still get them, but they're very expensive. But at Home Depot, you can get one of these 8 1/4 blades in some hardware stores for a decent price, probably between $25 and $30. So in the book it talks about if you want to resaw something thicker than your blade that you have to work with. With this, I have around 2 inches of clearance underneath the blade and underneath the motor. It is flat on the bottom here of the motor, so that does help a little bit. So this post is, the depth of this post is just about 3.5. So that gives me enough space to cut through once on the top, flip it around, and then finish the cut on the other side, and it should fall apart. In the book it talks about if you have something that's thicker than this, doing the same thing, and then if there's a little space that the blade couldn't reach, finishing that off with a rip saw by hand. I'm going to set this blade at 1 inch from the fence, so I'm just going to measure that with a tape measure and get the blade about 1 inch right there. And now I can lock it down with this knurled knob right here. That'll lock it in place and it won't move. Now there is a scale here which I'll show you. I'll zoom in and show you a little bit more, but that scale won't really work with what I'm doing right now because I don't have an auxiliary fence in front of here. I need to have this fence out here about 2 inches for it to line up. So for this time we're not going to use this scale up here. We're just going to measure it with a tape measure. So now I have it set at 1 inch. Next thing is to set the material and get that ready to go. So the material is going to come in from this side, and what I need to do is make sure that this guard is only about 1/8 of an inch away from this, because the blade now is going to be spinning. It's going to be spinning up and towards. It's going to act to maybe lift this board up. So we want to make sure that this is right above whatever you're cutting so that it doesn't kick up and flip back at you. It can't if it hits this guard. So that's why that guard is able to tilt like that. And there's a wing nut back here, and I just loosen that up. And I'm going to put it just a little bit above, about 1/8 of an inch above that board. Next thing we have to do is lower this pawl so that it's going to come down and it's going to hit the board. We want the board to pass through these jaws on the other side. The reason that you have this and the reason it's adjustable is so that you can have the board come through here and it will help prevent kickback also.